Shabbat Shalom, and this is 10 minutes of Torah. Not two children that Abraham will come close to sacrificing, and not the two lads that come with Abraham on one of those almost sacrifices, but 10 minutes, not 2 minutes, but 10 minutes of Torah. Well, I've mentioned in the past that these 10 minutes of Torah can be dedicated to someone, so it's my turn to do so this week, since we named our second grandchild last week, or we named as a family, but obviously our daughter Tamar, our son-in-law Daniel, picked beautiful names for our son-in-law Ori Lavi. Ori means my light, Lavi is a lion, named after my father-in-law and in memory of the Bebus babies who did not have a future, and this baby does. So today's 10 minutes of Torah is dedicated to, number 2 again, my second grandson, Ori Levi Lorberbaum. Now, this week's Torah portion has so much going on, and I will do my best to be quick on the summary because there's so much to say, and then return to a couple of points I want to make with it. So it begins the Torah portion which God has appeared to Abraham, and Abraham is having an interaction with God. Right away, 3 men appear near Abraham, and Abraham immediately turns his attention to those 3 men. Imagine that. We'll go back over this in a bit, but imagine that. You're engaged with God, and you leave your engagement with God to welcome 3 guests. Interesting situation. Well, these aren't really men. It turns out, as we have in other parts of the Torah, that these 3 are messengers of God. We see that happening from time to time, these messengers that come along that, kind of keep things on the right path. And why are they visiting Abraham and Sarah? They're visiting Abraham and Sarah because they want them to know that Sarah is going to have a child. Now, Sarah's 90 years old. How is that possible that she's going to have a child? It's been long past the time she could have a child. So when they tell her this, the text tells us, V'titzchak Sarah bikirba. And Sarah laughed internally. She laughed, right, in herself, not even out loud. Now, what is the name of the child who's going to be born to them? Yitzchak. You can see the relationship between the word v'titzchak, laughing, Sarah laughed, and Yitzchak, same name essentially, but laughter is not necessarily a mocking laughter. It could be easily perceived as a laughter of joy. How is it when I didn't expect to ever have a child, I'm going to be able to have a child? Well, following the visit of the 3 men, Abraham is now told that by God, right? So he goes back to his interaction with God, that God is going to destroy these 2 cities, Sodom and Gomorrah. And he kind of invites Abraham to argue with him. He doesn't say that exactly. He just says, I'm going to let Abraham know. And of course, Abraham does indeed respond by arguing with God. It's a great Jewish tradition, arguing with God. We even have a tradition of arguing with each other, but that's a different question. But arguing with God, and Abraham is arguing with God about God's righteousness. Indeed, he says to God, would you destroy the innocent, the righteous, along with the guilty? And God says, you know what? If you find me enough people in Sodom and Gomorrah who are righteous, I won't destroy them. It's interesting because what is the appeal that Abraham says to God? He puts it back onto God. He says, Hashofet kol haaretz, lo ya'aseh mishpat, will not the one who is the judge of all the earth, not judge justly. Anyway, this really is maybe one of Abraham's tests. Will he argue? And he does indeed argue. But it turns out that there aren't even 10, even 5 righteous. All you have are the family of of Abraham's nephew Lot, and they are told to to leave the cities before they're going to be destroyed. Well, the Parsha continues with a story we know from last week. That is Abraham claiming that Sarah is his sister and not his wife. But this is not, last week it was with Pharaoh in Egypt. This is with Avimelech, who's a local chieftain. And once again, he finds out by a revelation from God that this is not Abraham's sister, so don't try to take her into your harem, but rather his wife. And of course, seeing that Abraham and Avimelech, they actually end on better terms than Abraham did with Pharaoh. Avimelech sends him off with gifts, but doesn't want to be around him anymore. Finally, the Torah portion then concludes with, after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, it concludes with the parts that we read on Rosh Hashanah, that is the banishment of Hagar and Ishmael into the wilderness, and of course, chapter 22, the famous Akedah, the binding of Isaac. Abraham again is put to the test and told to take his son Isaac on a 3-day journey to an unknown mountain where he should offer him as a sacrifice. And as Abraham is about to follow through on this, another messenger, if you will, of God stops Abraham, shows Abraham a ram caught in the thicket, and it is sacrificed in place of Isaac. So a lot happening in this week's Torah portion that is of great interest. My question is, the book of Genesis, the book of Breshit, has very little to do with halakha, with Jewish law, with mitzvot. Most of that comes in the book of Exodus and Leviticus and onward. Very little. Last week we had, and I mentioned that this is dedicated to my grandson, well, we had the commandment for boys to be circumcised, Brit Milah. Right, that's there. They have a few other things, but not finding specific commandments in Breshit, in Genesis. The rabbis said, well, while it may not be commanded, judging by the actions of Abraham, we can learn an awful lot. And we go back to the very beginning. Because I mentioned Abraham was engaged with God, and he looks up, and he sees these 3 messengers who look like men to him. And what does he do? Doesn't question what they're doing there. They're strangers. Nope, doesn't question that at all. Does he wonder, do they have an ulterior motive? Nope. Does he think to ask them, where are you from? No. What Abraham does is to run from the entrance of his tent to greet them. And he says, if you please, do not go past your servant. Let some water be brought to you. Bathe your feet, recline under the tree, and let me fetch a portion of bread so that you can be refreshed. And of course, he doesn't just bring bread, he brings a whole feast. So what we see here is Abraham described, even though there's nothing that is commanded exactly, Abraham is described as performing a very important mitzvah in Judaism, hachnasat orchim, the welcoming of guests, even strangers, into your home. If you ever are in Israel and you do a Bedouin tent experience, a part of that is to show in the desert how guests are welcome, because they're wandering in the desert, and the first thing they do, they're under the protection of whoever's tent it is. So what we have is Abraham engaged with God and then going to welcome these guests. And the rabbi said that is a tremendous lesson, because even one who is engaged with God should break off from that to welcome guests. Now, why is that the case? And the answer is because, in a very real sense, guests are like God. What do I mean? Well, we are all created in God's image. And therefore, when someone comes and is in need of rest, in need of something, in need to be welcomed as a guest, it is as if you are continuing to welcome God. That is what Abraham's actions teach us, not the direct commandment of Haknasat Orchim, but rather as a model that we too, like Abraham, should engage with others, should welcome them, because it's like welcoming the presence of God. Well, this has been 10 Minutes of Torah dedicated to Ori Lavi. It is not 2 children of Abraham that he almost sacrificed, and it's not the 2 lads who go with him on a sacrifice, but 10 minutes of Torah. Shabbat Shalom.